Hello, everyone. I'm Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host today. Welcome, and thank you all for your relentless advocacy and tireless work. There's a lot going on, as you know. This is the year. We have an opportunity to enact into law mechanisms that could change the trajectory of global warming and help save our planet, at least from the United States side of things. So that's an extremely exciting and also daunting opportunity that we face. So it's obviously important that we get this right. I tell folks, the Civil Rights Act did not solve racism. Gay rights laws did not solve homophobia. We have to pass a law that will solve greenhouse gases. And we got to keep our eye on that goal and make sure that what we're doing is adequate to that mission, because we can't look up from our 10 years later and say, oh, what we did wasn't enough. Oh, that's too bad. We'll keep trying, because it'll be too late. We all know the timeline, less than 7 years to 1.5. We're already at 1.2 or 1.3. So the trajectory is clearly terrifying. So we have to double down and make sure we get this right. So today we have a host of experts. They're going to help give us deeper insight into this. We won't answer or solve anything today, I don't think, but we'll get a lot of information toward that goal. I want to announce and just show you real quickly the new website for the Earth Bill that has everything we need all in one place. So here's the home page. It's Earthbuildorg. It has all sorts of materials in it. I'm not going to go through it in detail right now because we have a lot to talk about today, but you'll see it's all here. The way to take the pledge, information, all the groups, the logos from some of the groups, activists here. This list will go on. It's already almost 200 activists who have taken the pledge. So I urge you to go to earthbuild.org and take the pledge if you haven't. There's also on this is our, so there's all sorts of information. Get Informed has all the details that you've seen in previous PDFs. Join the network is our mission, how we're organized, deeper dives people can do, joining Adopt a District, our Earth Core Monday night meetings. There's a real, here's a full meeting calendar. And if you click on that, I'll just show you, it takes you to the network calendar. So you can see all of our meetings. And if you get confused about when a meeting is, it's all there. The team leaders, et cetera, our principles and agreements. There's a resource page with all the memes that we have available for different things that you can pull from and share on Facebook, et cetera, in your emails that you send out. And then we have an events page, which is Pollution Independence Day, July 2nd. And all the details are here about what to do. We discussed this on Monday, and the exciting thing is that Fridays for the Future USA, the national entity, is joined. Thanks to Fridays for the Future New York City, and Anna and Emma, who are just incredible organizers. And they've also created an action network page where we'll be able to post all of our local events. And just briefly on July 2nd, and we'll talk about it more at the end, the idea is to go to your local congressional office, meet the staff, say hello, and so we'll talk more about that. But this is the moment where we're going to go and make physical contact with the most important voices on the planet, really. Almost everything else we do is secondary compared to the value of engaging directly your Congress people and then our senators going forward into July and August. We'll have a live stream Zoom rally at the same time on the same day from noon to 2. So people will be zooming in on their phone like you are now, but you'll be on your phone and from your congressional office. And we're looking to hopefully have celebrities join us for the rally. We have some exciting names in play already with some interesting connections to those folks. So if you know any celebrities or know someone who knows celebrity, we want to get some big names in here because we really need to take this idea of a Pollution Independence Day viral. We need to make it big. Now is the moment. We've organized a million things in our lives. This is the big one. This is the big enchilada. So I'll stop sharing. A real quick, briefly update on adopted district. We have almost 100 districts adopted. Some of the states are just going gangbusters on this. Illinois is almost all adopted. New York is almost all adopted. Washington, Oregon. That team has set up a new Earthbuildorg Northwest. I forget exactly the name of it. They gave themselves a name, and they're coordinating across a few states, and they're having their meetings about it already. It's extremely exciting.
That's right. It's Earthbuildorg Northwest, Todd.
Earthbuildorg Northwest. Thank you.
Yep.
And on Monday nights, we're meeting on that regularly at 8 o'clock. And the outreach team is just incredible, led by Michelle Brandt. And then we also have a congressional team, and we're discussing the action planning there. One quick note on, so please join us on Monday nights if you're available, 8 o'clock. A quick note on the bill package. You know, that's still in vogue, and the way the adopted district folks have done it is they've incorporated the Earth bill into their adopted district pitches. And so they're going in there and including that as part of the pitch. Another brief note on that, there are two bills in the package that have I'm sorry, there's a truck going by. Two bills in the package that are being pushed as well as part of the infrastructure package. That is the Climate Stewardship Act, Senator Booker, which is the regenerative ag piece with funding, I forget how much, a lot for, to help farmers transition to regenerative agriculture. And it has that magic definition and that we've used in the Earth bill so that there's synergies there, and getting this idea of a definition of regenerative agriculture into the mix. We are, of course, adding a mandate on big ag in that regard. The other thing that's being pushed is the End Polluter Welfare Act, which would eliminate the tax subsidies for fossil fuels. So maybe somebody will know more about that today, but if not, we'll check in that later. But that's just to show you that this is a package. It's part of a bigger effort. We're going to get what we get in infrastructure reconciliation, and then we're going to go full tilt for the rest, because we know whatever it is not going to be enough. And then Booker's also pushing an Environmental Justice for Pollution Legacy Act into there. And I haven't read it, but that sounds exciting. And then there are two other bills that are being written, one of which we have already a draft of, and the other is being drafted. Greenpeace is leading an effort with Representative Clark and Welsh that will have a clean energy standard definition. There's another bill by Representative Degat that Jan Rose has been keeping us informed on, that has a clean electricity standard by 2035 and a 50% tax credit for those kinds of transition costs. So there's a lot going on. And then of course, the national coalitions of US Climate Action Network and the CES group, and Climate Action Campaign are all collaborating and talking about CESs and working together in positive ways. There's still a road to go in terms of, I think, that alignment becoming perfected. So there aren't differences of opinions, but there are many ways to do that. And that's what we're going to hear about today. So I've already taken up more time than I planned. We're going to welcome now Galen Barboza. And Galen is with, let me just pull that up again, a very prestigious entity called, drum roll please, it is called the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And I was extremely impressed to hear Galen give this incredible overview of all the state. So Greg, if you could highlight Galen, spotlight Galen, that would be great. All the state CESs, RESs, RPSs, there's 3 different terms for the same thing, it seems like. So we're going to welcome Galen, and he's going to give us an overview of the state EPSs and how those work, and what else is involved in making sure that our policies and plans will actually result in a build out rate that's required to meet these goals of 100% by 2035 or 2030, depending on your preferences. So without further ado, Galen, we'll welcome you. Greg, I'm still seeing you spotlighted. So if you could spotlight Galen, that would be great.
I've got it taken care of.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Todd. So I was going to share my screen if that's okay, and just kind of walk through a few slides.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right. Just take me 1 second to do this. So let's see. Hopefully you all are seeing a slide deck here.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. And I just need to get us in the appropriate view. Okay. So yes, thanks again, Todd, and everyone for this opportunity to share some of the work here. So what I'll be talking about, as Todd mentioned, is providing a bit of an overview of state renewable portfolio standards, RPS policies. This is based on some ongoing work that we do at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, tracking kind of the implementation of these policies. We put out an annual report. I've been doing this for, gosh, at least 10 or 15 years now. And so the material that I'll be sharing with you here today is kind of an excerpt from the latest version of that annual report. And I've provided on the cover page here the link, rps.lbl.gov, where you can go if you want to get the full report and various spreadsheets and other work that we've done within this kind of general area. So first I wanted to start out by just really kind of giving a visual sense of where these policies exist. So the map here shows the 30 states plus the District of Columbia that currently have binding renewable portfolio standards. Collectively, those 31 state policies apply to a little over half of all retail electricity sales in the country. 58%. And you can get a sense here sort of for, where regionally within the country, these policies are more prevalent than elsewhere. You can see also in the boxes on the map here, I've listed the final renewable percentage target and the year in which it must be achieved in each state. I'll sort of show that information in a different way in a few slides. But just wanted to note that here. So those policies that I just showed you on the map are renewable portfolio standards. So those are policies that mandate a specific amount of renewable electricity. In addition to those RPS standards, there are also what are sometimes called clean energy standards or zero carbon electricity standards that also set some sort of percentage target, but are somewhat broader in terms of the range of technologies that can qualify. So not necessarily just renewables, but other clean or zero carbon technologies potentially might be eligible. So beyond the 30 states plus DC on the previous map, there are 6 states that have established some sort of broader clean energy standard along the lines of what I just described. Those are the states shown in red here. And all 6 of those states also have an RPS. So these clean energy standards kind of reside above the RPS, and the RPS in most of these states is fairly aggressive, usually kind of somewhere on the order of 60 to 80% renewable requirement. But then beyond that, there may be 100% clean energy requirement, with that remaining portion being met potentially either by renewables or, again, some other type of clean energy source. So just wanted to note the existence of those broader policies, but really for the remainder of my talk here, I want to focus specifically on RPS programs. So these RPS policies, they can vary quite a bit from state to state in terms of their design. Obviously, we talked about the target levels in the time frame, and those vary quite a bit. But even beyond that, there are all sorts of other different design dimensions to how these policies are implemented in terms of what entities are actually subject to those obligations. Is it all utilities in a state or just a subset? What the eligibility rules are for the types of technologies that can contribute, and whether those resources need to be new or whether pre-existing ones can also qualify. These RPSs can vary quite a bit in terms of their structure and the use of resource tiers or carve-outs. So for example, the map that we show here indicates which states have some sort of solar or distributed generation carve-out within their RPS. So this is, within the overall renewable percentage target, there might be some portion that has to be met with either solar or DG specifically, and about half of all states have some sort of carve out along those lines. So there are many other ways in which these policies can vary, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize that there is this huge amount of variation and kind of customization that can exist across these different programs. Most RPS policies have been around for a long time. So above the timeline here, we show the year in which each state initially enacted its RPS. And so you can see with just a couple exceptions, these policies have all been around for at least 10, if not in many cases 20 or more years. But they've evolved quite a bit over that time frame. And what we show below the line in each year is which states made some sort of major revision to their existing RPS. And in recent years, those major revisions have, in many cases, involved really kind of re-upping the RPS, where, for example, maybe a state initially enacted an RPS with fairly modest percentage targets. They've then come back and revise that policy to adopt higher targets and often kind of that with a longer time frame for meeting those. So with that little bit of background just on the kind of design and implementation of these policies, I wanted to talk now a little bit about what kinds of impacts they've had to date on renewable energy development in the US. And before going into that, it's just, I think, important to note that, there are a whole variety of different policies and market drivers that are all kind of collectively contributing to the growth in renewable energy. RPSs are just kind of part of that larger set. And so it can be difficult to kind of parse out the effects of RPSs separate from all of the other things that are going on. But there are a few kind of simple ways in which we can get some rough sense of the impact of these policies. And the first way that we can do that is just by looking at total growth in renewable energy over the last 2 decades and comparing that to what sort of the minimum requirement that needed to happen in order to meet growing RPS mandates over that time. And that's what the figure here shows, with the red line showing total growth and the blue line showing just the minimum amount that needed to happen in order to meet RPSs. And you can see that obviously renewable energy has grown much more significantly than what these policies mandated. And part of that gap, a big part of that gap, has to do with voluntary green power markets. And that includes, for example, corporate purchases, but it also includes a whole variety of other kind of market mechanisms and programs out there that are part of what kind of analysts often refer collectively to voluntary green power markets. Some of our colleagues at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, they put out their own annual report that focuses on voluntary green power markets. And that kind of parses that out into its constituent parts. So if any of you are interested specifically in better understanding that market segment, I would point you towards NREL's annual report. But then beyond that, we've also seen a lot of growth in renewable energy associated with utilities who are buying renewable energy just because it makes financial sense. And that those determinations in many states are happening through the integrated resource planning processes in place there. And then last, I wanted to mention net metered PV. So this is kind of rooftop, behind the meter rooftop solar. In many states, those resources really reside outside of RPS programs. And at least to date have been driven primarily by net metering policies and other kinds of incentives for distributed solar. And so that's also part of gap that we see between the minimum RPS requirements and what's actually transpired. Another way of looking at this is to just look at new renewable capacity that's been built each year and what entities are buying that power and whether or not they have active RPS compliance obligations at that point in time. And so that's what we've done here. The chart on the slide just shows total renewable energy capacity additions each year, and it breaks those capacity additions out into that capacity that's kind of directly serving off-takers with RPS requirements, and then everything else. And the red line just shows the RPS fraction of the total in each year. So what percentage of new renewable capacity built each year is directly serving RPS needs. And you can see that percentage has gone down over time. Cumulatively, it's about half of all renewable capacity that's been built over the last 2 decades. But within the past 4 or 5 years, that percentage has dropped to about a quarter. And a big part of that is just that we've seen such a momentous increase in renewable capacity growth over that time. And a lot of that growth is happening outside of RPS markets. This is sort of a national picture. If you look at the same information but broken down by region, it provides a little bit more nuanced perspective. And so the figures here are constructed in exactly the same manner as the one that I just showed, but instead are just focusing on each of the 6 different regions here. And I would just direct your attention towards the red lines, which show sort of the prominence of RPSs within each of those 6 regions and kind of their relative role in driving renewable capacity growth. And what you see there is that in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic, especially, RPSs have really been the dominant driver for renewable capacity growth in those regions. Also in the Western US, but though that's kind of diminished over time. In contrast, the 3 regions on the bottom, Texas, Midwest, and the Southeast, those 3 regions have seen a lot of renewable energy growth, but most of that is happening outside of any RPS program. And in large measure, that's just because RPS programs don't exist in those regions, or if they exist, the targets are relatively modest and in many cases have already been fully met. So that's kind of the past. I wanted to now just kind of really quickly end by talking a little bit about how much additional renewable capacity growth these policies might require. Here I've shown again the ultimate percentage requirements in each state and the timeline over which they need to be met. That's what the bubble chart here attempts to show. And I guess broadly, I would just stress that these 30 or so states with RPSs can be roughly grouped into kind of 3 different classes. On the lower left, there are those sort of legacy RPS programs with relatively modest targets, typically in the kind of 15 to 25% range, and with target timeframes that are pretty near term and in many cases have already come and gone. You've then got the next contingent of states sort of in the middle of the chart here that have adopted much higher RPS targets, typically in the 50 to 100% range, and with relatively near-term timeframes within which those targets need to be met, often by 2030. And then finally on the upper right, there are kind of a smaller group of states that also have relatively high targets, but longer timeframes. Virginia, Hawaii, New Mexico, those states. So with that sort of bit of overall framing, I wanted to then share this information here, which is our estimate of how much additional renewable energy is needed simply to comply with these policies over the next decade. And there's a lot of bean counting that goes into this chart. I won't go through the details of that exercise, but the bottom line is that we estimate that over the next 10 years, about 250 terawatt hours of additional renewable energy generation will be needed in order to meet increasing RPS mandates. To put that in perspective, that's equal to about a 50% increase of total renewable energy generation today, or as of 2019. And you can see in the chart here kind of which regions are really kind of driving most of that growth. And it's mostly, as you can see, the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic regions. California and a number of other states also have quite aggressive RPS targets, but they're much closer to meeting those targets. And so that's why you don't see nearly as much kind of absolute growth in those regions. So this information is in energy terms, terawatt hours. I think for me personally, I think a little bit more intuitively in capacity terms, sort of gigawatts, of steel in the ground. And so what we've done here is we've just really translated the information on that last slide into gigawatt terms, where we estimate about 90 gigawatts of additional renewable capacity needed over the course of the next decade. A lot of that is associated with some of the carve-outs that I mentioned, in particular, both solar carve-outs, but more importantly, a handful of states along the eastern seaboard have adopted carve-outs for offshore wind. And a lot of the additional capacity that is needed will be required to meet those offshore wind carve-outs. So now just kind of the last slide here, I wanted to put this into terms that I think are maybe the most relevant from all of your perspectives in thinking about getting to 100% renewable energy by a certain date and time. So what we show here, a couple different things. So the blue line shows just total aggregate state RPS demand expressed as a percentage of total US retail electricity sales. And what we see is that, if we wind the clock forward to 2030, these existing RPS programs will, on their face, require that the US be at about 13% renewable energy by 2030. In reality, they actually will require that we get to at least 17%, because some of the existing renewable capacity, renewable generation out there really isn't available for meeting RPS compliance needs. And so when we take that into account, effectively what that means is that we actually need to get to about 17% renewables. And to be clear, I mean non-hydro renewables. And then finally, on the very top sort of dotted line here shows the EIA's, the Energy Information Administration's reference case trajectory of how much renewable generation they think will actually happen, given not just state RPS programs, but all of the other policies in place. And they're projecting about 28% renewable generation by 2030. And a big part of that is being driven by federal tax incentives. So that's really it from me. I'm not sure, Todd, whether you want to do Q&A now or later. I'm happy to stick around, but in any case, I'm happy to take questions at any point in time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I felt like I understood all this, and now I feel like I'm in over my head. So I guess I've just one question, and then we'll go to the next speaker, and then we'll come back and talk about this some more. But so this is projecting 28% by 2030. So how do we get from 28% to 100%?
I think that's what the rest of your speakers are going to talk about.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. I mean, the 28, really, it's how do we get from 17% to whatever you want, because that 28% includes some other stuff. I see somebody asked, may we have access to these slides? Yes, you may. So I think the most direct way to get access is to go to rps.lbl.gov, where you can download the latest version of our annual RPS report, which contains all of the slides I just presented, plus many more.
All right, if you could put that link in the chat, that would be nice. And All right, well, since we decided to move on to the next speaker to try to get some of those questions answered, because this is the $1 million question, right? How do we get from what's expected now to where everyone wants to go and those goals that everyone's agreed upon? And we already had clarified that the CES is only one piece of the puzzle. And in the last 5 years, responsible for about 25% of the growth of renewables. And I understood from other presentations in the past that about 50% of the growth is being driven by corporations and another 25% just by the economics. So this is the $1 million question. How do we get to 100% and what policy proposal mixes are required? Next up, we're going to have Dan Esposito from Energy Innovation. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about these things. And also, he worked previously in the renewable development finance world. So he's aware of what the real lived experience is in terms of economics on the ground in this arena. So he's going to help shed some sort of real life experience as well. But he's also a scientist, an expert. And so welcome, Dan. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Todd. And thanks everybody for inviting me here. It's great to talk to you all. I'm also going to just share a few slides that I prepared. So bear with me while I do that. Okay, can you all see?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great,
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, Todd invited me to talk about the top policy actions that would actually enable this clean energy transition that we're all aiming for. A little bit of background on my organization. So Energy Innovation is a nonpartisan climate policy think tank. And we aim to deliver high quality research and original analysis directly to help policymakers make informed energy policy choices. So we work more or less for free directly with state and federal policymakers to try to get the best energy policies passed that most effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I've only been with Energy Innovation for about a month and a half now. But before Energy Innovation, as Todd alluded to, I worked for a company called PA Consulting, where I primarily helped get financing for new, really utility scale renewable energy projects. So I admittedly have a little bit less experience on the distributed generation side, but I spent about 3.5 years helping these larger scale wind and solar and battery storage projects get the financing they need to get developed. And then before PA Consulting, I did a little bit of work with various state governments. I worked for the White House Council on Environmental Quality back when President Obama was in the White House. And my background's in physics and math. So that should give you all you need to know about me. Really, I just have a few slides and then I want to open it up to a broader discussion, which I think would be helpful to make sure you all have what you need. But the core policy that Energy Innovation has looked at, and I'll supplement this with other considerations, but we are looking to see an 80% by 2030 clean electricity standard, or what I might refer to as an 80 by 30 CES. And we've worked with UC Berkeley and Grid Lab and others on modeling how this policy might turn out. And I think we have broader papers that go into more detail here, but I do think it's important to state up front that while I believe we're all organized here to focus on how a clean electricity standard would help us reduce CO2 emissions to solve the climate crisis, there's also a lot of other co-benefits that are really important when making the case to legislators. So our modeling revealed that, there are huge public health impacts. So you reduce these nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide emissions, which are responsible for things like particulates and asthma attacks almost completely just through an 80% by 2030 clean electricity standard. So that ends up, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but avoiding thousands, tens of thousands of premature deaths and having huge economic savings around it. We also found that a transition to 80% clean electricity by 2030 keeps wholesale electricity costs about the same over the next decade without accounting for these co-benefits. So basically what that means is if we did this transition the right way, you would not see increases to your electric bill. And I think that's a big story that particularly fossil fuel interests try to tell, is that clean electricity would be much more expensive. But we found with existing technologies with pretty conservative assumptions, costs have fallen dramatically enough for wind, solar, and storage that those costs would be about the same. It also supports about 500,000 more jobs per year relative to a case where we just have the status quo. So clean energy development is just a lot more capital intensive than building and maintaining fossil fuel plants. So there's a huge net jobs benefit from such a policy. We also found that the system is reliable with no coal, and no new natural gas plants. So we would be able to retire all coal in the US over the next decade and just keep our existing gas fleet, including retiring some of that, but we would need to keep some gas around at least over the next decade to maintain reliability. And then the aim is that, this is kind of jumping ahead, but on the innovation aspect, 80% by 2030 is the essential first step to achieving 100% clean electricity by 2030, which is in line with President Biden's stated goal. So we don't necessarily have all the technology we need to get to 100% right now, but getting to 80% by 2030 brings all of these benefits and gives us a decade to invest in those technologies and the R&D we need to get those final solutions in place for the last 5 years. And then the aspect I want to highlight on for the rest of this presentation is really the feasibility. So we know we can do this, but it's going to take a lot of new solar, wind, and storage, as well as maintaining our existing nuclear, hydro fleets and some natural gas. But how much do we need, and can we do it? So what the report found is that an 80 by 30 CES would need to achieve an annual average build of 95 gigawatts of new wind and solar over the next decade. That's about triple what we've done, that rate is about triple of what we were able to do in 2020. So I think we achieved around 32 gigawatts of new wind and solar last year. China, on the other hand, managed to build 120 gigawatts in 2020. So, there's a lot of differences between China and the US and how our countries operate, but it is technically feasible. But, what can we do to kind of unlock that potential to triple that development rate? We also need a similar boost in energy storage to about 8 gigawatts a year over the next 5 years. And then we need to, after those 5 years, we need to scale that up to about 36 gigawatts a year for the last 5 years. Frankly, the main challenge, if we were to get an 80 by 30 CES in place, would be siting and interconnecting these resources with the grid. And that's what I'll dig into a little bit more. But first, one last kind of preview slide. Here's some kind of helpful visuals on how dramatic the clean energy cost declines have been over about the last decade. So the top figure is, the bar chart is showing the cumulative capacity builds for utility scale solar photovoltaic development. So it's not quite exponential, but it's pretty close. We've seen some huge increases over the last few years. That is largely driven by the all-in, what we call the levelized cost of electricity, costs of utility scale solar projects. So back in 2010, they were, 10 times higher than what they are today. And that has actually seen a pretty exponential drop. And there's still room for that to fall further. So what those cost declines have done is made this transition possible without raising costs on consumers. And in fact, another report by Energy Innovation released last month shows that new wind and solar are more economic than running existing, already operating coal-fired power plants for, I believe that's 75% of all coal-fired capacity in the US. So renewables are already cheaper than 75% of coal plants currently operating. So pretty spectacular. We've also seen the bottom figure here, that forecasts of what costs will look like for solar, and I'm just showing solar, but this is generally true for other clean energy technologies as well. The forecasts are consistently conservative, and the actual cost declines have happened much more quickly than what various, very reputable agencies have predicted. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. There has been support from, state RPS programs. Federal tax credits have arguably been the biggest driver of these cost declines, which basically, make these resources cheaper sooner than they would be without federal support. And that helps you build those economies of scale where you have much bigger factories, supply chains that are more robust, et cetera. That helps bring these costs down. But really, this whole process is enabled by dramatically falling costs for these technologies. And so the challenge, maybe our immediate priority is getting an 80/30 CES passed. But after that, the challenge isn't cost. The challenge is how do we build these things fast enough? It's fortunate that Lawrence Berkeley National Lab released a report, it might have just been yesterday even, that took a look at, what is in the interconnection queue across the country. And what I mean by that is how many wind, solar, and storage projects have been proposed around the country and have applied to their local grid manager to interconnect with the grid. It's basically at a high level, a measure of what developers want to build right now. And what we see is there's a huge amount of renewable and storage capacity that developers are trying to build. It's really more than half of what we need by 2030 has already been proposed and put in the pipeline. The problem is it's gotten, for a lot of reasons, much more difficult to actually get these things built that developers want to build. And interconnecting with the grid is one of the biggest barriers. So, and 5 of the markets where data were available, studied by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, only 19% of wind projects and 16% of solar projects actually made it all the way to commercial operations. So, you're going from proposing, 460 gigawatts of solar, and maybe only, 80 gigawatts actually get built. And that would certainly, prevent the rapid deployment rates that we're seeking with something like an 80/30 CES policy. Across all projects, historically, only about a quarter have reached commercial operations. And the average wait time in this little graph down here, it used to be once you applied for interconnection, it only took about 2 years to get approval. Now it's closer to 3.5 years. And so all of that just plays into the delay and how long it takes these projects to break through. So why is this the case? There are several reasons, but right now there's just not a lot of coordination between the managers of these grids and how costs are allocated to these projects. So right now, in a lot of jurisdictions, if you're a solar project, you want to interconnect to the grid and you're next on the queue, the grid manager might run a quick study and say that, all right, for you to join the grid, you need to pay these huge expenses that basically build new transmission capacity to bring you online. And other projects currently on the system would benefit from that new transition or transmission, but they currently don't have to pay any share of those costs. And so, the first solar project in the queue, whatever they would pay for would benefit, say, the next 9 on the queue, but that's a huge amount of costs. And so they end up, in a lot of cases, not being able to swallow that price tag, which leads to them dropping out. So cost allocation and planning for how those costs are allocated is a huge kind of policy and regulatory action that needs to happen, where, you know, these grid operators should be required to spread those costs more equitably over all the groups that would benefit. And then that would kind of help open these floodgates to let more projects through. It's a complex topic, and I'm happy to go into it further, but the last kind of prepared slide I had was just kind of a suite of top federal power sector policy actions that Energy Innovation recommends. And so, you know, of course, there are also a bunch of state actions that will be essential because a lot of energy industry decisions are made at the state level, both by state legislators, public utility commissions, you know, governor's offices, et cetera. So it's not just a federal issue, but, and similarly, it's not just a power sector issue. We absolutely need policy that will rapidly electrify other sectors. So an example of that would be a federal policy that requires 100% of light duty vehicle sales should be electric by 2030. So Energy Innovation, happy to point people to more resources, but we have a lot of materials laying out these policies, but I wanted to focus on the top federal power sector policy actions. So real quickly, the first, of course, is adopting an 80% by 2030 clean electricity standard. We see that as the key policy. If we are going to get one piece past this cycle, this is the essential one because it serves as a backstop that drives a lot of the other actions we need to get us to that target. And really, you know, I get the question sometimes, why don't we adopt 100% by 2035? Why 80% by 2030? And it kind of depends on your view of the process and what's possible in Congress. If you think that you can get 10 Republican senators on board, you might be able to pass such a policy. But what I know Democrats are trying to do with this infrastructure proposal is work such a clean electricity standard into the budget reconciliation process, which has a lot of special rules that kind of change how you can design these policies. One of those rules is it needs to fit within a 10-year budget cycle, but it only requires 50 votes in the Senate with, you know, the assumption that Vice President Harris would serve as the tiebreaker in favor. So, you know, energy innovation modeling shows that this 80 by 30 standard gets us most of the way there, but it also does fit within this budget cycle that allows it to be, you know, a policy that can be passed in the next few months if we're fortunate. Beyond that, extending existing federal clean energy investment and production tax credits, those same tax credits that have been around for several decades that have really driven those cost declines. Those will continue to be important to keep this transition low cost and have those costs be equitably spread among the tax base. But even better, so tax credits, which is the current system, are more politically palatable to particularly Republicans, and they've been in favor of tax credits, and that's why they've continued to get extended over the years. But tax credits have a lot of waste associated with them. So renewable developers don't have enough tax liability to take full advantage of these benefits. And so they have to go to what are called tax equity investors. And without getting into the weeds, basically you end up with essentially bankers that capture about half the value of these tax credits, and the renewable developers get the other half. That's how it works in practice. So if we were able to convert them to what the industry calls direct pay provisions, but is more readily understandable as grants, and basically just give money to these projects, then of course that would lower costs and make them more competitive. We also want to expand them to allow any clean energy or energy storage technology to qualify. So right now, for example, standalone energy storage like battery systems do not qualify for these tax credits, but we need a lot of them. Excuse me. The two most pertinent to this discussion around transmission. So having provisions that streamline renewable energy and transmission siting and permitting are crucial. So we will need new transmission, both bulk transmission that goes across multiple states and moves power from very windy areas in the Great Plains to city centers like Chicago. Those projects are really difficult to get siting. You have to go through multiple state permitting processes. You have to get permits from all the local landowners that you go through, federal permits. And the whole process, if you're lucky enough to survive it, can take 10 years, which is just too long. However, there are proposals where Congress can require the Department of Energy and the Department of Interior to develop what are called national energy corridors. So that would be saying like, hey, we don't use this railroad anymore. We already have the rights of way. Let's designate that as a transmission corridor, do all the permitting ahead of time, and then put out a request for proposals to have somebody propose and build a transmission line along that corridor. So that would kind of get some pre-permitting out of the way, which reduces the red tape required to build those projects. And then renewable energy zones, similar concept, but for large scale renewable energy projects. You could say, hey, this area of federal land is going to be reserved for wind development. Again, we'll pre-approve the permits, and then it's just a matter of who wins the bids to actually build there. The other transmission-related policy is strengthening federal authority to improve the regional transmission planning process, allocate these costs equitably, and reduce unfair interconnection costs. And these kinds of policies, which again are complicated in detail, although a lot of legislators seem to understand that this is an issue. These kinds of policies can help free up that interconnection queue, which in a perfect world, if all of these were passed at the same time and implemented well, would free up those projects that are currently tied up in that queue. So again, that's really just giving authority to the players that are already responsible for regional transmission planning to change how they allocate those costs, because right now it is not conducive to projects getting built. And then a few final ones. We found in our research that demand side measures that reduce energy use are much more cost effective than building new supply side resources. So weatherizing homes, having energy efficiency appliance standards for lighting and home air conditioning use and so forth, as well as policies that promote distributed solar and storage, and policies that pay people and industries and so forth to reduce their energy use during times when the grid is stressed. All of those policies reduce the amount of renewable energy we need, frankly, and help us get there more quickly and more cost effectively. And then we should not leave behind those communities that are dependent on or have historically been dependent on coal. And so this actually dovetails with another problem, which we don't have enough people trained to build new wind and solar projects. And so there's this issue of people who've been mining coal to power our country for decades will necessarily be out of work if we're going to do a full clean energy transition, but we should not leave them behind. And further, there's going to be more jobs than we have people for. And if we can have programs that train these communities to take on that next phase of infrastructure development, then it could be a great way to get the people we need to fill these jobs and not leave those communities behind. And then finally, invest in research and development to make sure over the next 10 years, we're developing those technologies needed to get to 100% clean electricity by 2035. So we have several papers on this, but an example would be Rewiring the US for Economic Recovery, put out by us about a year ago. That has a lot more detail in what each of these policies mean, plus includes other policies to supplement the ones listed here. So with that, I have spoken long enough, and I'm happy to open the floor for any questions, as well as turn things back over to Galen for any questions that were asked of him.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much, Dan. This is very much laying out. If you could just leave that slide up there for a second.
Okay.
And we have Felice up, and then we have two other members of our electricity sector team who are going to give us some information about the lived experience in the states where people have been having CESs and then still encountering all sorts of obstacles to build out. But you say, the 80% by 2030 clean electricity standard is the most important thing we could get this year. But then we see that, the existing ones are only accounting for 17%, that's only 30 states, of course. So how is that the most important thing? Or is it, why is it the most important thing? Just in a nutshell, and then we can dig into this more in our time.
Yeah, in a nutshell, existing state RPS programs just simply don't cover enough both states, but also like their targets are longer term and not as aggressive as what's being proposed here. So they end up being, as Galen showed in his graphs of different regions and how they're developing these resources. The Midwest, for example, or Great Plains, those states don't have much RPS demand at all. Their targets are just very low. But the economics of wind and solar are so great that developers have been building these resources regardless. What an 80% by 2030 federal clean electricity standard does is basically bring the whole country up to a more aggressive target than any state has set for itself yet. There's no state out there that I'm aware of that's 80% clean electricity by 2030. Maybe New York. So it serves as kind of like a backstop where there are regions where, the economics aren't good enough on their own to replace existing natural gas and coal. And a federal clean electricity standard would just push the entire country in the same direction more rapidly than any state is going on its own.
Mm-hmm. And are you aware if any of these other elements are included in conversations right now about the American Jobs Act, and would they even fit siting and permitting, or do we need another bill to address the actual build outs trajectory and timeline?
I think they do fit. I know that Biden's American Jobs Plan has provisions that would create like an office of transmission deployment, something like that. And the reason it fits is because they're putting a ton of funding into building out new transmission. And they're basically just, rather than saying how exactly it should work, they are giving authority to experts in these other agencies to basically carry out this vision of putting a ton of people to work and building new transmission.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan. This is good and helpful, and it's excellent, really. And we're, I think, getting a clearer picture of where things need to go and how they're going to get there. So we're running late on time. It's 1 o'clock, and we have 3 more guests today. So I think we'll just go in order. Felice, if you don't mind waiting for a few minutes, and then we're going to let Michelle Lee say a few words. Michelle, I'm going to ask you if you could to keep your remarks to 5 minutes, and then also for Stephen Sondheim to keep his remarks to 5 minutes, and then we're going to let Felice go from EDF, who's going to be talking about the actual game that's in play right now, and then we could come back to Michelle and Stephen, who are part of our electricity sector team, and we could have a longer conversation that goes beyond the 1:30 deadline or timeline. This is like the most important topic of the year, of the planet, of the future. So we're not going to rush them all. And as you know, these are ongoing conversations that never end after one Zoom meeting. So I'll welcome Michelle Lee first. And Michelle, I'll let you introduce yourself if you don't mind, and say a few words about the lived experience on the ground. We're trying to get renewables built in states that already have these RESs, but yet the obstacles are real. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks so much. Okay, but so before I go into my tale of woe here, just want to point out something, that there's essentially strong consensus among clean energy experts globally that you really have a handful of things that are a highest priority. So one is efficiency, and you can include grid modernization within that category. And Dan, described why, and I think we all intuitively understand why efficiency is so crucial. The second is electrifying as much as possible. And the third is ramping up renewables as fast and aggressively as we possibly can. So I'm going to tell you the answer to all those problems right now that we can end the meeting. Stop the subsidies to fossil and nuclear. You will see the market transform miraculously overnight. And remember that reliability is built into the system. So we don't have to worry about reliability. The energy industry does that for us in terms of keeping the lights on and so forth. Although we can talk about Texas and California and climate change, but that's another topic. But what we would really want to do is ramp up renewables, and the way to do that is and efficiency and grid modernization. And the way to do that is get the money, that huge sucking sound of literally hundreds of billions that have gone to fossil and nuclear over the last few decades, and get that whole stream diverted. I think of it as almost like water, like you're just diverting the stream so you don't have to add extra taxes, you don't have to add extra costs, just move it over to what we all know needs to be done. So let me try to, in 4 minutes, tell you my tale of New York. So back in 2014, New York, and this is when Cuomo was a baby governor, came out with a amazing reforming the energy vision plan. And it was just marvelous. It was just everything we in the clean energy community could wish for in terms of its overall vision. And the New York Public Service Commission was tasked with starting a proceeding to implement that wonderful vision. So that started out being called the Large Scale Renewables Program proceeding. And I was actually, as an attorney, a formal intervener. I represented a bunch of environmental groups and public officials, and we did all sorts of little presentations before the Public Service Commission, and we wrote hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of briefs, and we filed, and we did activism, and we were all so happy because then everything was going to be wonderful. And suddenly, overnight, the large-scale renewable program morphed into a massive subsidy to New York's old, deteriorating, uncompetitive nuclear power plants in upstate New York, like that. So out the window went every single goal that New York had enunciated. New York was going to be prioritizing efficiency. Efficiency got knocked out completely. New York was going to be prioritizing consumer choice. Oh my God, all the consumer choice stuff that came out in public announcements. Oh, we're going to move consumer choice. Consumer choice went out the window. Every single New Yorker had to be paying essentially Exelon Corporation, which was, by the way, a $34 billion company that was heavily invested in nuclear and fossil fuels. So what happened? Oh, wait, the best part was that the bailout, which ended up being $7.6 billion to just go to 4 upstate old reactors, was more than twice as much money as was going to be dedicated to all renewables combined. So again, efficiencies out the window. Now all different new renewables have to compete for less than 50% of the money that's going to entrenched energy interests in upstate New York.
Mhm.
And I like to think of the image as Exelon Corporation, as the Roman Colosseum, with Exelon Corporation way up in the balcony is the emperor wearing a little crown, and then peanuts being thrown onto the Colosseum floor for all the new renewables to fight it out and compete for their tiny little bit of money that they're going to get. And in fact, they didn't even have to get it, because what utilities were able to do was, if they didn't want to go forward with renewable, they could just pay an extra charge. And remember, gas is very, very cheap. So paying the extra charge, wasn't a big deal. So what was actually going on here? Well, a couple of years after, and again, we fought this like crazy. We fought it at the PSC. We tried to fight it in court, to no avail. So 7.6 billion went to this $34 billion corporation that had, before they got the bailout, which in the Public Service Commission order came down on August 1, 2016. About a month or so before that, Exelon went and acquired Pepco's natural gas distribution network. Right after it got the money, it went and took over some of New York's gas distribution resources. On its website, after it went for this bailout, supposedly because Exelon was so worried that we'd have to stick with gas, the website said, natural gas is a bridge to a clean future, giving off less than half the carbon emissions of coal when burned. So basically, Exelon, which invested in fossil and gas, managed to knock renewables off the table.
All right.
And just one more point. A couple of years after the bailout, the New York State Joint Commission on Public Ethics came out with a report, its annual report, that just focused on lobbying, so registered lobbyists in New York. And lo and behold, here's what it said. Some of the largest retainers paid to lobbyists in 2000 related to nuclear energy. However, the largest single retainer came from the Nuclear Energy Institute, a nuclear industry trade group. In addition, ads placed in an effort to support zero emission credits for nuclear plants, and that was the fig leaf that they used, was also among the top lobbying entities ranked by advertising, events, and other expenses. So that's the answer to that question.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michelle. It's very informative, and we understand, our community is very on top of this issue, and so it's very helpful to see what happens in real life. All right, so we're gonna then pause, and Stephen, if I can ask you to hold, if you don't mind, and I'm gonna take Felice out of order.
I only have 3 minutes.
Oh, okay, if you could do it in 3 minutes, go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, thank you. I just sent to the chat the essence of what would have been a slideshow, but we were never able to get it together. So everybody look in the chat. Basically, my quick background is I've on a nuclear free team of the Sierra Club. I've been involved in TVA and Illinois, and I reinforce what Michelle said. But the main point I want to make is the hurdle to full implementation of clean electricity standard, which does not include nuclear or fossil. And the point I want to make, the word I want to put forth is decarbonization. There's a lot of machinations going on about how we decarbonize. And a lot of both fossil and particularly nuclear are putting forth that particularly nuclear is decarbonization. And so all these bailouts and all these attempts, there's even a proposal of $200 billion production tax credit in the national bill to pay nuclear plants up and above their profits, 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour as incentive or to keep them going. We have to be very cautious about allowing those kinds of things to count towards decarbonization. The plan, even in Illinois, is to allow nuclear until 2050. Whereas if that money obviously went to true renewable, not including nuclear, we could be there much faster. I propose we could be 80% there by 2030. So we can talk about this later, particularly with the first speaker here, but be aware of decarbonization rules, including nuclear. Thank you. Did I keep to 3 minutes?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, that was great. That was the only first person I've ever actually heard say they were going to keep the 3 minutes and actually do it. I know I can't. All right. Well, thank you for those helpful and informative elements. Next, we're going to invite Felice Stadler from Environmental Defense Fund, who you know Felice. She comes and gives us regular updates. And Felice, go ahead and take it away. I won't try to preface what you're going to talk about.
Okay, and then do you want me to keep it to 5 minutes so we have time for discussion, or?
Just say what you feel like is important for everyone to know, where we are in the lay of the land, and just see how long it goes.
Okay, so I think I've probably been a bit of a broken record, but I appreciate being always invited back. I'm going to continue from where we left things a month ago, which is we have the administration, the president unveiled the American Jobs Plan. It's a massive and bold infrastructure investment package that does a whole number of things, including makes significant investments in precisely the policies and the outcomes that we're looking for, which is decarbonizing. I am going to use the word decarbonizing the electric power sector, electrifying the transportation sector, and driving investments in specific projects and programs that will lead to addressing the impacts of climate change and also making our communities more resilient and modernizing our both the built and the natural environment. There is, I would say, from the broad, when I talk about the groups in Washington, D.C., so the national groups that have been doing the lobbying and then working closely with the Coalition for Clean Energy and Healthy Communities, and US CAN is a network that has also a foot in a number of these coalitions and tables. We are, as a community, pretty laser focused right now in building the support we need to get a broad, bold infrastructure package in scope and in ambition as laid out in the American Jobs Plan across the finish line in Congress. The lift ahead of us is tremendous, and the risk of our issues, our priorities falling to the cutting room floor is very great. And the window is really narrow. And the way that we have begun to talk about it among colleagues, it really is a once in a generation opportunity we have to make investments in precisely those areas of the economy that are so desperate in need for modernization and getting us precisely the investments and down payments in driving towards the policy outcomes we're after. Todd asked me, well, what's in it for climate? Like, how good really is the American Jobs Plan? It's $2 trillion. Is it really just roads and bridges? Roads, bridges, broadband, making, VA hospitals more energy efficient. Some of these things, like they're getting the headlines in papers. It is much more expansive than that. So I'm going to give an example. You think about transit systems in this country. Transit systems are woefully underfunded. This pours money into transit systems. Look at look at rail in this country. It's pathetic. Like, I ride Amtrak a lot. It's pathetic. It stops at random places. It can only take you to a few cities. It expands actually rail. That's a really important thing. It puts investments into charging infrastructure. So for those of us who spend probably more time in the car than we care to admit, and when you drive up and down the Eastern Seaboard from here to Maine, which I do a lot, you don't see charging stations everywhere. And where you do, it's pretty much Tesla and a few others. So really investing in charging infrastructure to support not just the personal passenger vehicle that may move to electrification, but also pushing for the electrification of short and long haul. It's investing and making sure that there's tax incentives and tax credits, not just for wind and solar, but expanding it to battery technology. Really critical. We are not going to be able to electrify the transportation sector if we don't really supercharge, not to use that word, but I will, supercharge investments in battery technology. We can't build them fast enough if we don't have batteries. It's expanding tax credits and tax incentives for offshore wind. Little did I know that right now the renewable tax credits that are set to expire don't extend to offshore wind. So these are some examples. Another one is near and dear to me as a mom. Look at the school system that we have in this country. Look at the built environment where our children spend how many hours a day, how many days over the course of their 18 years, or not 18 years, well, actually probably in some cases. Many of those buildings don't have basic energy efficiency. They don't have air conditioning. Some don't even have heat. This bill puts money into actually modernizing our schools across the country. It's making sure that school districts have money to electrify their bus fleets. Why is that important? Well, depends on the zip code you live in these days, determines whether there's money to make sure that the school buses are modernized, and whether the school is a modern building. So Todd, you asked me what's in this bill that helps and aligns with our climate priorities. It's expansive. We heard earlier of like, what are some of the things that we know are important to addressing the climate crisis? I completely agree that subsidizing continued fossil fuel is a huge problem. This bill, as far as I can tell, is not tackling that one, but I have not read all of the fine print. But it does include some of the other things that we know are really, really critical. Energy efficiency, getting our country more energy efficient. We are such a wasteful country, and our industries are very wasteful. Our cities and towns are wasteful, and not because they choose to, but because there has not been adequate investments to modernizing them. Ramping up renewables, absolutely critical. Getting those tax incentives, tax credits, tax incentives is absolutely critical. And then electrifying as much of our sector, transportation sector, is absolutely critical. There is a link I'm going to share with you that I found. It gives a really good catalog of all of the programs with the dollar figure that are embedded in the American Jobs Plan. Right now, what's happening is that there's a very lively debate unfolding on Capitol Hill on some of the bills that are being introduced and some of the bipartisan back and forth that's happening. And what's clear is that there are either key programs where Republicans are showing up with like paltry amounts of money, thinking that that's going to be sufficient to address the investment problem that we have. In some cases, there's entire programs that are being eliminated. So I'm going to share with you the full list and the lobbying that we're currently doing, and the messages that we're pushing into Congress is that any bill that you're considering, any opportunity you have, make sure that it meets the ambitious goals that are reflected in the American Jobs Plan. So today, for example, in the Senate Finance Committee, they are marking up right now a clean energy tax bill, really important bill And markup will likely go through tomorrow. And we're watching that very closely. Sadly, it continues to go down. The votes are split by party, and we're not getting much bipartisan pickup in some of these areas, although some of them have enjoyed bipartisan support. So what does this mean for the month of June, since I only come see you once a month? So June 7th, you know me by now. I always come with an action. I think it's a wasted opportunity. I'm an activist at heart, been an organizer for 25 years. So the week of June 7th, mark your calendar. It's the week of action. We are working across the country with all partners to really raise up the noise levels for why we need a bold infrastructure plan that prioritizes our climate priorities and climate investments. There's going to be toolkits. There's lots of material that's produced to make it really easy for you to plug in. So what I'm going to do is stop talking for now and see if anyone has any questions, and I'll see if I can work some magic and put at least the link of the one webpage that I mentioned.
Well, thank you so much, Felice. And yes, so here we are in the thick of it. So we're hearing some good news and some bad news, obviously. It's always going to be that way when you're working with policy. It sounds like we need to double down on the federal tax subsidies for fossil fuels and the End Polluter Welfare Act bill. When we have our Pollution Independence Day, I think we should probably lift that up along with the Earth bill and make that point, because you're hearing there is a opportunity cost with funding certain things over others. It's not like there's an infinite pie of money, although it's pretty big. So what are the opportunity costs, for that? And it sounds like that's a big issue. I'd also be interested if Galen is still with us, or Dan, if there are any lessons from China. You said they built 120 gigawatts in 1 year. So is that just money and centralized coordination? And if so, what's the plan for centralized coordination at our federal government level? I don't hear anyone talking about a federal NYSERDA. Although one organization, Resources for Future or something, does have an idea to set up a procurement entity or power within the Department of Energy, I think it was, to do procurement and then give grants, of course, at the state level for renewable procurement there. And if there are mega project required for this capacity build out, obviously that's going to require a federal coordinating entity. And there should be one. I was the ombudsman for brownfields revitalization in Massachusetts under Governor Weldon. We coordinated 17 state, federal, and local programs, permitting and everything to get contaminated industrial properties revitalized. And so there is a very important role of coordination at that level. And there could be eminent domain powers and grants and all sorts of mechanisms in that entity to actually make sure we accomplish this on a deadline. Because that's the problem with all of this. It just puts incentives and plans in place or ideas in place, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not a plan to build by a certain deadline, which is our challenge, obviously. But Felice, did you mention the week of June 7th? I know about June 9th, there is 100 faith leaders for 100% clean energy on the mall. And every week, every Wednesday from then on, there will be an action similar to that. And they'll be followed by some lobbying visits. And each week is a different constituency. So they have small business owners and labor folks and people from West Virginia. You get the idea. That'll be happening weekly. So over the course of June, we'll tap into all these other actions and help to see how they amplify ours as we're building toward July 2nd. Obviously, on our path to July 2nd, we want everyone to initiate an email to your congressperson now if you haven't. The following week, call and set up a meeting, see if their offices are going to be open. The following week, make sure you have your whole team aligned and where you're going and when you're going to be there. So each week we'll have action steps that we'll take together. We don't have this call anymore as frequently as we used to. So you'll be looking for your emails for that kind of encouragement and alignment. And then always join us on Monday nights at 8 o'clock. If you want to get into the Earth Corps, which is the Earth Corps, and these folks are hard at work doing outreach on the Earth bill.
So Todd, let me just clarify. I did reread. So when we talked about fossil fuel subsidies, so the Clean Energy for America Act does actually address a number of our priorities. And I really like, if you have 5 minutes today or tomorrow, ideally today, 5 minutes, look up to see who's on the Senate Finance Committee. If you could put a call into them and urge their support for this bill, it is really, really important. The Republicans are adding things that we don't like, and we need to make sure that the integrity of the bill stays intact. Really could use people's help. If you're not on the Combined Defense Project list, Sierra Club put together some really good information that makes it super simple. But if you just went to Senate Finance Committee in your web browser, you'll find who it is. And make a phone call, because there are some really, really important things in there that we want to make sure are not stripped away.
And which bill is that again, please?
It's called the Clean Energy for America Act. And I put it in the chat here, provides tax credits for clean electricity generation, electric vehicles, clean transportation fuels, energy efficiency, clean energy bonds, provides, tax breaks for people to invest in an electric vehicle or energy efficiency appliances, and also repeals tax incentives for fossil fuels. So really, really important. And really, if you have 5 minutes, on behalf of Senator Wyden.
I think we're going to make 5 minutes. If you just included the magic button, I think, for a lot of people's ears perked up when you said it eliminates the federal tax subsidies for fossil fuels. And so that's interesting that it's a bipartisan bill. They're trying to get that through bipartisan, you said?
We can't get anything bipartisan. So that's what I'm saying, like, pick up the phone, call people, push people. It would be great if we can get the Democrats all united behind this. I'm telling you, like, we cannot take any vote for granted. I don't care if you got an R, a D, or an I after your name. They want to hear from constituents, especially those who are up for election. They want to hear from constituents that this is really important. So we have a lot of opposition on the other side, and all the help we can get would be really wonderful.
All right, so we'll send out more information about this push.
Okay. And you are on the, are you on the CDP list, Todd? Can you just forward that email
to the CDP list? Yeah, once we can do it. Yeah.
Well, no, if you have his email, I'll forward it to you right now. If you can forward it onto this list, since I don't have your distribution list, would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Wonderful. So one other thing, thank you so much, Felice, for all.
See you in a month.
Yes, and we'll be in touch, because now we're talking about all the coordination behind the scenes and getting more alignment and resolving any differences among the big players. I think everyone's starting to pull in the right direction, it feels like, but I know that there are still some sticking points. I'm hoping we can get past those sticking points, because what could be more important than saving our planet? Whatever it is we're fighting over, it doesn't matter. But I think the good news is people seem to be pulling in the same direction pretty collectively. Do you agree with that? Okay, yay, good. Wonderful. All right. Well, I want to just invite Nancy Lawrence to come up and say a few words about your meeting with Senator Schumer, if you feel like it.
Oh my gosh. It was really positive. And he started out asking for 4 minutes to tell us how he has an electric vehicle bill and that would be right in line with ours. It's up to 2040. So you get confused by that. It's up to 2040 for old vehicles and up to 2030 for new vehicles for production. So that was like, whoa, wow, that's great. Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, you know what he said, which was really important? I think you guys were really smart to start with bills, to start your whole project with bills. So thank you for that, Todd, and everybody else who worked on that. Yeah, it was just really a good meeting. And I think there was like a good kind of coincidence on what's considered clean energy, and we really pushed him to stick to our definition to keep natural gas out of that definition, and as well as some of the other kind of hydrogen things. Yeah, so the funny thing was he said, guess what Senator Schumer and the Clean Energy Standard have in common? We both have the same initials, CES.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, yeah, he really talked also about the importance of the reconciliation process. So, and he talked about this Wyden bill as the one that Felice just mentioned as being the way to stop the fossil fuel subsidies.
Wonderful. And so you met with him directly, actually met with Senator Schumer.
Yeah, yeah.
You folks are amazing. I'm in New York and I'm not even involved in this. And I'm sort of grateful and glad, but also I can't believe it. Sarah Gronholm and Nancy Lawrence are leading this team, and they've met with Senator Gillibrand's staff and countless legislative representatives. So I'm just really impressed to hear that you got an actual meeting with Senator Schumer. He's a busy man these days. How did you manage that?
Sarah managed that. I did not. Sarah did that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And the other thing is that, you know, he's proposing that we have like a much bigger forum, that we organize a much bigger forum where he could talk about the whole climate crisis and the bills that relate to that. So that is like really a wonderful opportunity. We could make it bigger than just New York State, I think, since he's the majority leader and everything he does has national consequences.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a wonderful offer. And maybe we can tie that. I don't know how soon he wants to do it, but maybe we could tie that into July 2nd and have like 10 to 11 be something for him. And, you know, and then, you know, the rally start at noon. So let's see. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. He didn't mention the filibuster, did he?
I don't remember him mentioning the filibuster. No.
All right. Well, before we go to Regina and some stat questions, and then we'll just hang out as long as we need. I just want to see, is Galen, are you still here? Or Dan, did you all take off?
I'm still around.
Who was that? Dan?
Dan, yes.
Dan, so do you know anything about China? And
Not enough, unfortunately. Their system is so different, and I just haven't had time to really dig in. I do know they have a lot more state coordination with their 5-year plans. But while 120 gigawatts last year is a ton of capacity on an absolute basis, it's still a pretty small percentage of their overall energy use with, you know, how much energy they consume in that country. So I don't know at this moment if I have any direct lessons to draw other than that it's technically feasible.
All right. Well, it might be interesting to see if there are any lessons that we can steal, borrow. You know how it goes in international issues. You know, whoever, that's the United States is saying, well, we'll be out front and we'll teach the world. Well, it sounds like China might be a little bit out front and maybe we can learn something. Was there anything else, Dan, that you wanted to add from today after all you heard?
I don't think so. I've been trying to address questions in the chat, but I'll also leave my email in case anybody had any follow-ups for me.
You're a brave man. All right. Well, so we'll conclude our formal part of the meeting then and stop the recording. And thank you all for everything. And let me just think if there are any final points. Please, if you have not yet please adopt your district. Obviously, everything is happening in a congressional district right now. Nothing else matters. And I know myself, I have not called my congressperson, even though I know there's a team working in my district. And I've finally figured out where the offices are. There are 3 of them in the area. So I'm gearing up for July 2nd. We have Fridays for the Future. Couldn't be more excited about their work and their leadership on this. We're looking for celebrities, as I mentioned, to help make July 2nd exciting. And so now's the time. If you haven't adopted district, please do. You can do all of that through the Earthbuildorg website now. There's a little bit of tweaking to be done on the names and the logos and things, but I think all the links are right. please now feel free to go through that and click around. And if you see anything that's wrong, I'll do it myself, of course. But if you see anything that's wrong or needs updating, let us know. And I feel bad that we don't have another gathering. Well, we'll have the second Saturday in June. So I take it back. We will have a second Saturday in June. There's some question as to whether we want to cancel the Saturday meetings for the summer. So we may cancel that, we may not. Stay tuned for that. And for a logo for the group supporters, if we don't have your logo up, we'll add it. Please double down with your organizations. This is very important. The 200 groups that have, 200 individuals almost that have taken the pledge are affiliated with countless organizations around the country. It's really important to get those organizational endorsements for the pledge. And I know it's a little bit of a journey, but anything you can do to expedite that, hold a special meeting, do email, you know, to get the conversation started if you don't have a meeting for a minute. We just need to expedite it because that's going to be very powerful. And now that we know that we have alignment on CES and electric vehicles, the only big piece that we don't have, you know, coming from leadership levels, the only new piece really is this requirement on big ag. And as I say, there's a piece going on regenerative agriculture that's being pushed for this. So it's not that far a stretch, which sounds incredible because a few minutes ago when we first came up with it, it seemed like a little pie in the sky. And now it's seeming very feasible. And so please adopt your district. Please join us on Monday nights. And please get your groups to pledge support for the Earth Bill.